Good morning, everyone. We are on to topic number three, cash management in crisis. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. This session today really is going to be focused on how do we navigate the cost crisis in a very hands-on, tangible manner. We know that entrepreneurs are working on running the business, maintaining it, keeping it afloat, making sure that you can pay yourself a bill, pay yourself a salary to cover the bills, excuse me, as well as to give yourself the opportunity, hopefully, to even continue to thrive and grow in this challenging economic environment. With this content in mind, we're really hoping that it gives you um, I would say a 50,000 foot level as to how you can manage cash, but also give you a clear route to how you can take action directly. So this is going to be a session that both covers a little bit of the kind of strategic approach, as well as the very nitty gritty kind of things that you could do on a daily basis to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the cash position of your business. And as everybody knows, cash is king. And we want to make sure that you have the ability to continue to thrive and grow during this period. And as an ex-entrepreneur myself, or I don't know if you could ever really be an ex-entrepreneur, but as an entrepreneur myself, I do believe that keeping a close eye on the cash and working towards some very clear objectives will enable you to really build on a very difficult economic environment. And it is possible in my mind for us to see some really great results come of it. And I hope that this will be the launch point for you to think through that journey as we move forward. So with that, what should I focus on? Cash management might sound, I guess, kind of maybe it's intuitive, right? Maybe for you, you already do this on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you already actually have a practice in which you feel quite confident in your ability to control the direction of the boat, if you will. But I think a lot of times people get really caught up in overcomplicating the cash management practice. And it's important that we be purposeful about how we use your time or how we use our time, because ultimately at the end of the day, if we are spending too much time or too little time focusing on the issues, we end up either over indexing or we simply don't do enough in order to make sure that we are delivering on the key objectives of our business. And as a business owner, it's important that we're driving in a very focused and lean way, such that we're able to deliver ultimately for ourselves, for our customers, and ultimately make sure that you are able to achieve your end objective. And so what does that mean? For some people, it means not focusing on the fancy financials. Some people spend a lot of time doing a lot of research, trying to build out a perfect Excel model, or maybe trying to utilize some kind of fancy software in order to make sure that they can kind of predict or prepare themselves for every single circumstance. And the reality is too much information is actually a danger as well. It is potentially, I guess, it leads to this thing called analysis paralysis, right? So essentially, you spend so much time doing research and analyzing the state of the business and kind of doing little models and trying to create some these fancy statements that you can share with stakeholders, when the reality of the circumstances is sometimes it's actually about getting back to basics. Sometimes it's about making sure that you have a clear vision to what really matters in the business and not trying to generate paperwork for the sake of paperwork. Now, I recognize that sometimes we can't escape paperwork. Sometimes there is a need to file some of these filings with maybe Companies House or HMRC, and there's no escape in that. But the reality is we're not trying to create unnecessary paperwork when the government does require we submit some stuff that unfortunately becomes just necessary paperwork. But beyond that, are there things that we can be more lean on? Can we focus in on what matters? And this also, of course, ties into that comment I said earlier about forecasts. Now, forecast is the practice of trying to predict where your business will be. That is great to an extent, but we're not trying to overdo it. We're not trying to build a model that can understand or model in what happens if an earthquake occurs in a various country. Now, maybe if your business is built on understanding earthquakes, then you might want to do that, of course. But if your business is not built on kind of modeling in earthquakes, I hope you're not spending too much time on delivering an Excel model that can predict the nature of an earthquake on your business, because that's probably not the most important thing for you. If you're a retail shopfront, an earthquake in Chile may or may not have as much consequence to you, but there are definitely things around foot traffic, local policies, and prices that might have a significant impact on your business right here and right now. Now, it's not to dismiss any of the content that was discussed earlier when you were talking about the economy and my business, because very much so, there are macro effects that will impact your business, things that are outside of our control. But we need to be building a practice that allows us to take control of the circumstance and allow us to truly be the owners of our own destiny. Building a business really is about keeping an eye on the most basic thing, cash management. So what does that mean? It means that ultimately we're looking at how can we create a practice that lets us understand the ins and outs, right? You see on the right side, cash management, the process of collecting and managing cash flows. It's not a complicated thing, right? Cash comes into the business, cash goes out of the business. How do we understand that? How do we make sure we have a very good visual and knowledge kind of base built around that information? Now, some people say, oh, hey, all you need to know is what comes in, what goes out. And a lot of people have built a really sound practice of managing their business based on that. If you're a person who can really thrive off of kind of keeping tallies in your head and doing your day-to-day operations and remembering to focus in on that, this topic may or may not be for you, right? Some people are naturally more inclined to being quite conscious of the margins of your business. Now, if you have a good knowledge base of your business and you feel like, oh, yes, I really understand how the cash flows in, how much money I'm making per unit, you're ahead of the curve. But there are still things that we can actually do in today's practice, in today's session, to discuss maybe other ways to think about it to make sure that you're getting the most out of that knowledge, not just so that you know what comes in, what comes out, but rather kind of what do you need to work towards? And we actually have a whole session on that later today in our unit economics session. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're listening to this, because it's important to kind of refresh that knowledge, make sure you feel good about how you're managing your cash so that you can always speak confidently to where the state of your business is. But this also enables other people to be able to make decisions in a more I would say rapid fire way. So earlier in one of the sessions, Max was talking about how you could possibly engage with some of your suppliers. If you are able to speak confidently to how the cash moves in your business, you're better able to negotiate with your suppliers. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit more. So in thinking through these things, there are many applications that you may not think of right away, but keeping a, I guess, comprehensive picture of the business in your mind as you work towards, navigating the cost of living crisis really will help lend itself to hopefully a thriving business as a whole. So what's the one thing that we can start to look at as we move forward, right? A lot of people already know about how your business is doing. So you already know if you're struggling or if you're doing well, right? That's not really a surprise, right? That's not something that's going to be like, whoa, I didn't know that was happening. But rather, in this circumstance, we will probably want to ask ourselves a big question here. We want to ask ourselves, right now, is our business trending towards ultimately administration, or are we trending towards a circumstance where we believe we see the light at the end of the tunnel and things are going really well? Maybe, for instance, during the cost of living crisis, you've seen a drop in business, right? And that would be kind of expected simply because everybody's kind of tightening their wallets, and they're getting ready for the holiday season. They're trying to navigate this winter energy crisis. All these things are kind of on people's minds. And we need to be kind of prepared to understand, how do we navigate as a business? What kind of growth do we need to hit in order to manage our cash appropriately? So there's a tool called the Startup Growth Calculator. And this, you don't have to be a fancy tech company in order to use this. It's a tool put out by Y Combinator, which is a fancy kind of startup accelerator program. And the program is great, but ultimately what we're focusing on here is I guess the importance that they place on cash as an early stage business or even as a late stage business. It's important to utilize this tool in order to make sure that you understand, am I default alive or am I default dead? And what does that mean? So default alive is the practice of saying, where we are today in terms of weekly revenue and our weekly expenses, do we have enough money to get to the point of profitability / break even, right? On the left-hand side, you can see that there's a revenue bar here. So you can move this little red bar up and down on the tool. The link is here on the right-hand side. You'll also see that you can change your weekly revenue number to go up and down. You can change the time frame to be weekly, monthly, or yearly in order to kind of figure out like how much money am I making now and how long of a runway do I need? And we'll talk a little bit about runway as we go forward. But in this journey, we want to make sure that we have an idea of how much money is coming into the business and going out. And if you do, you can apply it very simply here to understand, okay, what kind of growth do we need to see in order to achieve that profitability or break even? And this also gives you an estimate of how much capital you need in your bank, as well as when do you think you'll achieve that profitability. And this is pretty significant, quite honestly, because like if you've had a bad month or a bad year, you'd be in a situation where you could see that there is demand for this kind of break-even point, right? So if you're at year 2, you can see right here in this little graph, let me see if I can move my mouse, boom, right there, that at $100 weekly revenue and $1,600 weekly expense, that it can grow at 2.5% and you'll achieve profitability 2 years later. Now that's a pretty far out time frame, right? But so you can play with it. You can see how much capital you need. You can move the revenue up and down. It will tell you how soon you'll get back to that point where you'll feel good about the cash position of this business. Now, I apologize. It is made in dollars because it is an American startup accelerator company. But that doesn't mean that you can't use this for your own needs. So you can simply just say, hey, 1,600 weekly expenses and put it in pounds, and that will totally be okay. That's not a problem whatsoever. So this tool will allow you to get a sense of, okay, how far off of break even are we, right? If the sales have gone down because people aren't here in doing business, okay, how long do you think it will take to get back to that point where business was doing well before? Or how long will it take to get to this new level of profitability that we're targeting? Each of those things is quite important. It's important to have an objective to be working towards, because if you have cash management as your practice, you should be managing your cash to a certain objective, right? So that you can feel comfortable about where things are going. You're not just managing cash for cash's sake, right? It's not okay to just watch expenses come in and say, oh, well, that's all right. I mean, obviously, I think most entrepreneurs know that, so that's not exactly a shocker. But when it comes to thinking about how we can understand our cash position, it's really important to put concrete numbers to it, right? It's good enough. It's not good enough to say, oh, yeah, we're kind of paying the bills right now. Well, I mean, if you can speak confidently to the exact numbers of like how much you're short or how much you're over, that's brilliant, right? But being able to speak kind of loosely to it kind of puts you in a level of kind of uncertainty that would honestly scare me back in the days when I was running my business. So when I set up the restaurant with my business partner, we were looking at a regular practice of saying what happens on a day-to-day basis such that we can achieve that level of comfort, knowing that we're moving in the right direction. If we don't have that number in hand, then we have no idea what we're working towards. We have no idea what we need to do that day. We have no clarity as to how we can do our manual physical operations to deliver on our cash management practice. So I highly encourage you to check out the Default Alive or Default Dead tool. It's a great thing and it's completely free. So you're more than welcome to be able to use that. So knowing this, what is good cash management? Well, ultimately, it's about knowing the risks and strengths of your business. So if you know how things are working innately in your mind, that's great. Maybe we should take the time to document that, right? Maybe we should put some effort into making sure that what we do is actually manifesting in the financials, right? And if you're not a financials person, I completely understand, because it's not exactly the most fun thing on the planet to be able to stare at a bunch of spreadsheets, right? Some people really thrive on that, other people don't. And in this journey, it's important to kind of recognize your strengths. And we'll talk a little bit about financial acumen and getting in people who can help you at the end of this, because I think it's an important topic to discuss. But knowing the risks and strengths of your business, in this process, it's important that we really have an inventory of what's happening, right? We cannot just simply accept that, oh, I generally know what happens, right? Because this is supposed to be paying your salary, right? This is supposed to be paying how you operate. This is supposed to be paying for your team. So having a really concrete understanding of the risks and strengths really enables you to either address the risks or build on the strengths. And building on the strengths is quite key, because when we think about the nature of our business, we need to stand out. We need to really highlight ourselves in the marketplace, and knowing the risks and strengths facilitates that. So how do we think about other aspects of good cash management? Ultimately, it comes down to building in buffers for mitigating those risks that we already assessed in step one, right? It's key that we have a practice in place so that we can say, oh, you know what? Even if things do go poorly, a la rising energy prices, or a supplier goes missing, or the shipping container doesn't arrive in time, how do we build in buffers so that that moment isn't a crisis point for us, right? How can we ensure that we are surviving each of these moments as best as possible and allowing ourselves to hopefully capitalize on moments of uncertainty? Because if it's happening for you, it's likely happening to other people. So if this is a systemic thing, maybe there are ways that we can kind of mitigate that by building in that buffer. And maybe we can stand out in the marketplace again, right? So turning risky moments into strengths. So an example of that could be that if you know that there are some other retailers on the street who are also kind of supplying a certain stock, and you know, for whatever reason, that collectively all of you guys are getting the same materials from the same country, maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to think about sourcing from a different supplier, so that if the supply chain is disrupted, maybe you're not as impacted, right? COVID right now in China, for instance, is a big pressing issue and it's impacting some factories. But if you're sourcing from a different country, yes, the price may be more, but is there a possibility that you might actually have had continuous supply chains, right? Could you have turned that moment into a distinguishing point for your customers because they know that you're actually still able to source their materials, right? And maybe even you can pass on the cost, right? You can say to other people, hey, I've had to take on this cost. I want to turn this into a moment where we both thrive. Could you help me cover the cost, right? This is a very reasonable question. It's about building relationships with your partners so that you can actually say, hey, look, we can thrive together, and it's completely feasible, right? So thinking about these risky moments as opportunities to distinguish yourself. And I recognize that it's easier said than done, because often in that moment, there's a little bit of panic. But anyhow, we must think in the opportunistic kind of framework here for these risky moments in order to make sure that we don't just take it sitting down, honestly. Like, these challenges to our business are trying to attempt to derail your operations. And we can't let that happen, right? We have to kind of build on that, adapt to the environment, adapt to potential opportunities. So what's the third thing? Focusing on things that create margin positive moments. Now, what is margin? Margin is something that we're going to discuss quite aggressively in the unit economics session. And if you're not comfortable with the idea or the term margin, think of it as simply as that the difference that you're capturing from, you know, what you paid for a good and what you sold for a good, or your service, right? There are other ways to think about that, but ultimately we want to be creating margin positive moments that occur with our customers. So when you're thinking about that buffer, hopefully these margin positive movements are contributing to that. They're allowing you to kind of build up a little bit of a reserve. And I recognize that in this environment, a reserve is quite challenging to secure, but it is about saying, how can we build towards that on a long-term basis, right? Because as Max pointed out in a previous session, the economy is cyclical. There will be challenging moments in the future. And for us to have that focus now enables us to be prepared for the next one, as well as potentially even to ride out this one. So while we're building a good cash management practice, I want you to keep these 3 points in your mind. We really want to have an inventory of your business, right? Not just the physical goods, but also the risks and strength of the business. Knowing that, we should build in buffer for those risky moments. The risky moments are scary. They are now, right? But at the same time, we can address that by building margin positive moments. Each moment that we facilitate or create in the business that allows us to generate a little margin helps create that buffer, right? Remember, create margin positive moments. So when thinking about cash management, we need to be conscious first of that risk component, right? What are you spending right now? And I use the term burn because this is the phrase that they use in the startup ecosystem. And it's applicable across all businesses, right? You as the entrepreneur are in a startup, right? Even if that business has been around for 20 years, you are still the one who has to kind of make it work, right? That startup mentality is about keeping that hustle, keeping that energy, and keeping that focus on making sure that you're delivering value for your customers. Now, it might get kind of glamorized in TV and in movies and in the press, but ultimately it's really about kind of the nitty-gritty things that I think you are very familiar with. And so I think put yourself in that context. Remember that you're the entrepreneur who is navigating this economic circumstance, and it is important for us to make sure that we understand where we're going and how we're going to deliver on that. So how much are you burning right now? Right? That means how much are you spending every month that is taking away from the cash balance, right? And I don't mean just like raw spend, right? Like I'm not saying, oh, you spent 20 grand on inventory and therefore your burn is 20 grand. No, what I'm asking about actually is the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. What's the difference there, right? If I started this journey with, 5 grand in the bank account and, this is my startup capital, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to buy some goods. I'm going to make sure that I'm navigating this process effectively. And you spend 1,000 to buy a new product, and then you sell it for 1,500, then your burn is probably 500 quid, positive actually. But if you sold those goods for 500 quid, now you're 500 negative, right? That is your burn, right? The money that you're losing from every month, that is your burn, right? And then if you can have a positive burn, but they don't call it positive burn. They call that profit, right? So it's important to understand how much runway you have left. Now, as you can see on the right-hand side, there is a little formula there for runway, but runway really just means, how much money do I have in the bank? How long is that going to last, right? Not a complicated thing. Fancy word for a very practical issue, right? How much money is in the bank and how long is it going to last? Okay. If we're not clearly checking in on this concept on a weekly basis, whether or not you've been doing business for months or years, right? Unless you know that intuitively, you should be knowing this number very consciously, right? So there's a difference between being very purposeful about knowing that information, right? So you know that if you sell blah X units in the store or X services on a weekly basis, that you're good. That's fine. Let's quantify that, right? Let's be very purposeful about understanding how much money is there, right? The reason for this is because stakeholders, partners, financial institutions, suppliers are going to want the nitty-gritty detail on this, right? It's not enough for us to say, generally speaking, if I sell 100 units, I'll probably be okay. I mean, sure, that's fine, but you should know how much your margin is, right? We'll talk about that in unit economics. You should also know how much is coming in, how much is going out, because your financial partners who maybe be able to help you in this circumstance, let's say, for whatever reason, your suppliers are late, they're not going to be able to deliver, you're having a cash crunch. What do? Right? You can ask a friend who maybe has a business that they can kind of lend you the money to continue operating. You could go to a bank, right? You could go try to get some working capital from there. Or worst case scenario, you have to draw on your personal savings. Or, right, maybe you need to be very, very creative and you need to do a crowdfund, right? Raise some money from your local customers if you're a local community institution, right? There are lots of ways that you can think about that, but you can't do any of that unless you're very clear about when are you going to be able to get out of the hole. It's not possible for people to say, I'm going to give you money just so that you can continue to burn it, right? They have to have vision to understanding when does this end? When do you see yourself at a good point? And that's actually why we talked earlier about this. Let's go right here. The default alive and default dead component, right? Now, if you missed this component, we have a recording of this session, so don't stress. The startup growth calculator lets you know when do you think you'll be able to get to a point of break even or even profitability. So when you're thinking about how much runway or how much burn is going on in your business, we have to be very intelligent about making sure that we're capturing this information on a regular basis, right? I know lots of people spend their time looking at their bank statements and say, hey, I generally know how much is coming in, coming out, but is there an average number? Is there a consistency? If there is, that's very powerful information, right? Because then we know how much on a monthly basis is required in order to deliver on this business, right? So for example, restaurant businesses often have to buy inventory, right? They also have to pay rent. They also have to pay for staff in order to serve food. So in this facility, right, you know roughly how much your cost of food is on a month-on-month basis. You roughly know how much your rent is going to be, and you roughly know how much your staff is going to be. So you have a target number that you need to be hitting every month. If you don't hit that number, you're not going to be able to pay, right? And that's the key aspect of this business is we know that there's a target there that we're working towards, and this is what's important for us to deliver. So when we think about that burn and runway, this aspect is really key, that we have clarity as to when our cash position runs out, okay? Burn and runway contributes to this topic here in the middle, building in buffer for the risky moments. It also contributes to knowing the risks and strengths of your business model, right? We'll get to focusing in on those margin positive moments today, later in the unit economics session. So I highly encourage you to come back for that one, because we're really going to dig specifically into a example of like, what is that moment that creates profit for the business, right? What does that moment look like, and how does it contribute to us surviving as a business and even thriving, honestly? Okay. So when you're thinking about cash management, I've seen big multinational businesses collapse because they have not paid attention to their cash position, right? We even see this today in crypto, right? We see this in global institutions which have raised hundreds of millions of pounds and dollars, and yet at the same time, they still make big mistakes, right? Sometimes it's fraud, sometimes it's poor accounting, sometimes it's poor management. There's a mixed bag of things that can happen in this world, and there's no reason why it can't happen to you as an individual or to you as a small team, right? If it can happen to the big companies, it can definitely happen to you. So the things that we need to be conscious of, and the things that compose a good cash management practice, typically relate to inventory, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and cash. Now, some of those terms are more accountancy oriented, right? But ultimately, it comes down to kind of how much we pay other people, how much money's coming in, how much money's going out, what's in the bank, right? It's a very simple fundamental practice, right? People often put lots of big labels on these things for absolutely no reason, other than probably to justify their new industry or career path, right? And that's respected. I understand. Everybody's got to make a living. So in thinking through your inventory and your accounts receivable and your accounts payable, it's really critical that we turn our eye to these 4 pillars of cash management in order to make sure that we deliver something for ourselves, meaning pay yourself, give yourself a dividend, give yourself a lifestyle that you are putting in for, right? You are working in this business not just to exist, right? But you're working at this business in order to facilitate certain goals, right? Whether that be your own financial security or whether that be your own impact in the community. These aspects are really important to consider. So what do I mean by inventory needs, accounts, and cash? Ultimately, I've seen cash businesses collapse based on issues around lead times, cash being locked up in inventory, payment terms falling down where honestly they shouldn't be falling down, unit economics. We'll get into all these details. So what do I mean by lead times? Too often we have businesses that are built on other partners, right? And that's just the reality of it, right? This is a global economy. These are global businesses. And oftentimes when you're thinking about the lead time of these partners, there is always room for chaos, quite honestly. There's just no escaping the reality that people have things happening to them, right? That they have life going on as well. So while you're working on things and building out, maybe let's just say, maybe you have a furniture business, right? Maybe you're building and making furniture. There has been a drastic increase in prices in lumber or timber industries, right? So what does that mean for you? Well, it could mean that some of the suppliers are actually going out of business, right? And if that's the case, are they going to take longer to deliver that product for you? Then let's compound that issue. What happens if their cash terms require that you pay in advance before you receive your inventory? This leads to point 2, cash locked up in inventory, right? So if your product, which is necessary for you in order to sell and generate revenue, is dependent on other people, then there is very much a likelihood that your cash is probably being locked up in the operations of the business. And that's something we have to be very careful of, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you still have to generate, remember, margin positive moments. So when you think about margin positive moments, sorry, I see that my screen is not in full screen mode here. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure here. Here we are. Good deal. We are in full screen mode again. Apologies. So if you were thinking about your cash lockup and how much cash you need to float your inventory, it is obviously quite critical that we build in enough buffer so that we can say, even if I lock up a little bit of cash in inventory, I can still generate enough to keep paying for my rent, to keep paying for my salary, and etc. Now, there are opportunities or possibilities that you can utilize working capital facilities, meaning people who are willing to secure your inventory for you in order to provide cash. So for instance, if you're ordering lots of units of, I don't know, let's just say books, there are financial institutions that if you have regular transactions and you show them that you're consistent about these things, that they can help float the cash necessary for the inventory. Now that can make a serious difference in your business if you're ordering, tens of thousands of pounds, right? If you're ordering tens of thousands of pounds worth of goods, it could be worthwhile for you to say, okay, let's finance a little bit of this now and pay a little bit of a fee in order to make sure that you're not blowing out your entire bank account just to pay for inventory. Now, I recognize it's a little bit harder when it's early stages of the business, right? Working capital or invoice financing is not always a solution, but there are ways that we can be clever about it. So think about what ways you can do to kind of create some liquidity, and liquidity refers to having cash in your bank so that you can do stuff with it. Find ways to create liquidity so that you're not locked up in inventory, right? Because during a crisis, you never know when you're going to need cash, right? What if, for instance, you've put a bunch of money down for inventory and the heater goes out in the restaurant, right? People are going to be cold. Is that going to work? Is that going to be sufficient for you? Will people be okay with it being a little nippy? Or is it going to be the dead of winter and it's going to be sub-zero temps in the restaurant? That'll be a hard sell to your customers, right? So it's thinking about these kind of things and building in those kind of protections for chaos moments. And I highly encourage that you have discussions with your suppliers as it relates to payment terms, because this could be another lever that you turn in order to make sure that you're getting the best rates or the best kind of terms, really, for managing your cash. Payment terms usually are standard 30 days invoicing, right? But some businesses have preferential terms for regular clients, right? If you don't ask, you don't receive. So too often people accept the terms as is and they say there's nothing, okay, that's just how they do it, right? Well, it's true. A lot of businesses will probably say no, but what's the worst case scenario, right? You say, hey, look, we're on a little bit of a lead time issue right now. Inventory takes too long to get here. We need a little bit of flexibility. Can you work with us? There's a surprising amount of partnership that can occur in this moment if you work with them to understand kind of what are the circumstances and let them know how they can be flexible with you. Now, people are way less flexible about payroll, obviously, because they also have to pay their bills. So please be conscious of the timing of all the previous 4 bullet points as it relates to payroll, and including yourself, right? I obviously want you to prioritize your well-being, but I obviously don't want you to prioritize your well-being over the sake of those who are dependent on you, right? Because you as an entrepreneur are a leader in your business, and it is your responsibility to make sure that you're taking care of your peoples. So when you're thinking about how you can facilitate payroll, if there are challenges, transparency is key, right? Being honest with your team and letting them know what's going on is quite important. If you're at a point where there's a little bit of uncertainty, it's better to work together with the team than it is to leave them in the dark and then shock them later on, right? It is really important that, I know it's not as intuitive, right? You're afraid that people will leave and staff will go away, but they are more likely to leave if you are not transparent with them, if you're not honest in that process of kind of navigating a tough circumstance. I guarantee it, right? I say that from a point of Being in a company that has gone into administration, I have been in positions where I've had to let people go. And I can tell you that people definitely prefer the transparency route. Expenses, I think that's pretty obvious, right? I think most people have a great sense of what bills are coming due. So I'm not really going to belabor that point, but I do think it's important when you're thinking about obviously your cash management practice, right? So as a reminder, I really encourage you to think about your cash position on a weekly basis, if not daily, just depends on kind of the nature of things. In businesses where, you know, there is serious liquidity issues, meaning like it's kind of a cash crunch crisis point, people are checking every day, right? And it may lend itself to a little bit of analysis paralysis, so don't overdo it, but give yourself a check-in point to remind yourself of what's going on in the business so that you can make sure you're working towards your objectives, okay? Now, taxes gets really complicated because taxes has a series of floating dates, as well as a series of potentially tax jurisdictions you could be operating on. I suggest that if you're having struggles with taxes, it is best to reach out to the authority that you're working with and to convey that information to them, right? Let them know that you're having struggles with it because they often can work out plans as it relates to your business to make sure that you are not going under. Because ultimately, the government authority wants you to succeed as an entity, because if you don't succeed, right, they're likely to not get their taxes. If you do succeed, there's likelihood that they'll be able to get more taxes from you on a longer term basis, right? So there is a benefit to them to see you survive this, to survive an economic crisis. So if you can, don't wait to the last minute when it comes to your cash management practice as it relates to taxes, because the government authorities are willing to work with you. Now, it may not be as ideal as you want it to be, but it's certainly better than having to shell out your entire year's tax bill if you're in a really tight cash position, right? So they can work with you to navigate that process. And I highly encourage that you take a look at HMRC's website or speaking to the council if it's a business rates question, because they really want to work with you in this process. And I say that because, you know, I have worked with HMRC before as it relates to tax practice for various businesses. It's doable. And while it seems intimidating, it's best to reach out and express yourself and explain to them in an honest and authentic position so that you can actually try to get as much help as possible from them. These aspects of working capital, you know, they're just some examples, right? There are lots of things that contribute to it. I think these four big headers are, oh, it's frozen real quick. These four big headers are the major pillars of what contributes to working capital or cash management. It's really important that we keep a close eye on this, right? Because you know what? There's something I haven't actually talked about in payment terms that I want to bring up. In payment terms, sometimes it's about charging your customer, right? And setting your invoice date. I think it's really, really, really important that you express to everybody and are very clear to everybody about payment terms, right? Because too often people will be like, oh, well, you know, I don't have the cash right now and I can't pay, right? Remember that in this macro environment, it is completely possible that other people are going through some similar struggles, right? That they may want to reach out to you to ask you to negotiate through payment terms. Where you can, obviously pay it forward, right? Because there are ways that that might benefit you on a long-term basis. But generally speaking, try not to make your payment terms too complicated, right? Don't make them either too short or too long. Depending on the nature of your business, I couldn't really speak to everyone's business because there are going to be nuances to payment terms. But if you are an invoice kind of based company and you need to issue invoices and people have a little bit of flexibility in paying you, remember that there's a very high likelihood that people won't pay you, right? And don't be so key man dependent upon one invoice that if that invoice didn't come through that your business goes under, because then you haven't built in buffer for that risky moment, right? That's point number 2. Build in buffer for that risky moment. So if you haven't done that, we need to be conscious of that when we're thinking about our payment terms. We need to be very clear with our customers that if you're not able to contribute the full amount, maybe we need to rediscuss and discuss how maybe we can structure this payment a little bit differently. Maybe they can pay a little bit up front and then pay the remainder later, right? If there's a little bit of that worry in discussing that with your customers, remember, customers appreciate authenticity, right? They care about understanding that you are also a human and that they want to work with you and that you're also willing to work with them. That is significant. And when you're engaging that process, do your best to be as authentic as possible, because I know it's tricky in an environment where, maybe everyone's feeling it, right? Like economically, a lot of people are feeling it right now. And it's not exactly a brilliant time to go through this, but it is when we connect with others in our ecosystem that we strengthen that supplier network. We strengthen the customer base, because they remember that moment, right? They remember that, hey, I'm going to come back to this point and Tim did something really great for me, right? So try to build in those moments and build on it, and maybe even convert that into a opportunity, right? You can convert risky moments into strengths. So all that's fine and dandy, but let's talk practical real quick. I actually have a spreadsheet that I'm going to pull up on the screen, so I'm going to stop sharing in a second. But when we think about our cash management practice, I hope everybody's utilizing something that's just a little bit more than in your brain, right? Because if it's in your brain, you're going to be prone to error, and that's statistically likely, right? It's also hard to communicate this with others, right? And so especially if you're working with other people, it's important to make sure that you're conveying this information to them in a way that is consumable, as well as stakeholders, right? So stakeholders could be partners, it could be invoice financing groups, it could be the bank, could be the council, right? Any of these parties would want to have transparency if you're discussing some kind of cash flow circumstance with them, right? They would want to understand where are things and how is it working. And I actually have a template here by the British Business Bank that we can kind of briefly work through. And that will be shared with everybody at the end of this webinar, so that you can actually think about how can you track your financials. Now, the beautiful thing about this spreadsheet is that this spreadsheet actually is openable on Google Sheets. So if you don't have a Microsoft Office license, you can access it there. If you do have a license and you're very comfortable with Excel, then you will actually find that this is a really well-built plug and play kind of tool where people can actually just type into the white cells and get calculations out in the blue cells. There are loads of instructions in the spreadsheet. So if you're not terribly savvy with financial spreadsheets, no stress. This actually gives you lots of hand-holding through each of the cells. So you can take your time and actually work through this in your own time, but we're going to go ahead and navigate through this as a team really quick to just give you a kind of an understanding of how cash management can occur in a very kind of physical sense. So give me one moment. I'm going to pull this spreadsheet up on the screen. Here we are. Okay. So as I said earlier, there is a lot of flexibility in this spreadsheet. They actually provide you with a little bit of information to kind of set the tone, give yourself an idea of how to utilize this. Now, this tool was actually built to utilize in your startup loan application to the British Business Bank. So if you're in a circumstance where you're early on in the entrepreneurial journey, you can actually use this template to actually apply for a startup loan. And they actually have loans up to £25,000. So if that's something that's on your mind at the moment, you can definitely take a look at that. But let's just say you're later on in the adventure and you've been operating for a little bit and maybe a startup loan doesn't apply. That's okay, because this helps give you a point to kind of revisit some of the core aspects of your business. Now, if you're in crisis, I understand that it's not exactly the number one priority. Sit down and say, hey, what are my objectives? How's my business structured? But it is probably worth examining if you're in a situation where things haven't been working the way that they should be. And we need to kind of pivot. We need to create a moment of opportunity for this business in order to thrive in this new environment. So when you're thinking about how do I navigate this process, if things have not worked, it's time to consider a pivot. And so this is where it's worthwhile to sit down and kind of, one, go through this entire spreadsheet here and fill out the cells, right? Ask yourself the questions that they're giving you on the guidance column and give yourself a realistic assessment of how things are going, right? This is part of that inventory process that I talked about for step number one. Know your strengths and risks. So when you're thinking about your skills and your experience, your target customer, it really kind of helps to document this. Now, I recognize that as an entrepreneur, you feel like you probably know your customer. I can tell you that as an entrepreneur as well, it has benefited me immensely just to take a step back and to document what things am I doing well? What things am I doing poorly, right? I know that it takes extra work and that you're, focusing on the operation of the business, but there is a need for you to focus on these things as well, because it's how you give yourself the headspace to create new opportunity, right? It's imperative that you create new opportunity for growing as a business. So the business plan is really great to fill out. I would highly encourage you to do that. If you have questions or comments or concerns even, reach out to the team, right? We're here for that. We're here to support you. We have the resources, meaning the persons, to be able to sit down and talk you through the different aspects of this spreadsheet, as well as we have multiple programs that work to serve your needs should this be of benefit to you. So as you can see here, we even talk a little bit about competitors. This is just literally typing it in, right? You don't need to get too technical in this space. Second, on tab number 2, we have a personal survival budget. Right? Personal survival budget is quite key. If you're not clear as to what your own financial well-being is or what your own financial requirement it is, this is the basic budgeting exercise. Now, I recognize that for some, this might seem elementary, but it is probably better to make sure that if things are in a tough kind of state of being, we have clear insight as to what is the bare minimum that we need in order to survive as a individual, right? Or as a family, right? Because ultimately you have to be able to deliver to those needs on a long-term basis, right? If we can't deliver to that, then the business is failing and you're not going to have the headspace or the focus to be able to deliver for your customers, right? So let's prioritize you. That's why it's number 2, right? Because it's key to being able to survive. It talks about the various costs. One of the things that you'll note is that if you have, for instance, if I put an employment here, I'll leave it as 0 and I'm not making any money, right, from the business, but I still have to pay rent, right? You'll see something pop up here that your monthly balance is -1,000. This is that personal burn that I was talking about earlier, right? Because this is money that's coming out of your bank account and is not being filled. It's not being replaced, right? So a burn rate can apply to your own personal budget, that if I have no savings, a monthly -1,000 obviously is going to be pretty problematic, right? So this is something that we need to be conscious of, right? As you can see here, little blue and white instructions here as well. Blue cells auto calculate. Don't manipulate that. Let that be. And then fill in the white cells in order to kind of give some more information or context. Now, this -1,000, this number actually becomes useful in tab number 4. So don't rush to adjust that. Let's hop to tab number 3. Now, tab number 3 talks about sales assumptions and how the business will grow and operate, right? So as the operator of your business or as the leader of your business, you should have some visibility to how products and services are performing. Let's just say you're a masseuse, right? And you bill hourly, right? So what we could do is we could put a massage hour here. We can put in the rate. I don't know what massage rates are, apologies, but let's just say that you're paying yourself $15 an hour. So now you know the margin per unit is 50%. We'll get into more details about unit economics later on. Remember, we have that in our, I believe it's 2:30 or 2:45. I'll double check that timing for you. 2:45. That's the time for the unit economics session. So you can put in your product and service, and let's just say you have 10 hours of clients a month, right? That's just a number. Let's just put 40, so 10 hour a week. So you have 40 hours of service. And so on average, you're looking at probably doing about 1.3 sales per day, right? So that's your target, right? You know what you're working towards, you know how much you're doing, but you also see how much you're kind of generating in sales. You also are knowing how much you need to be paying your cost, right? So maybe if you had a team, you should be aware of, like, generally speaking, what are the costs here, right? And this is a very basic kind of business model, right? I recognize some of you guys may have more sophisticated models, and that's completely fine. But make sure that you're boiling it down to its core essence, right? If your model has started to get very complicated, what we need to be understanding is very basic things, right? Margin, right? How is that contributing to my costs? How much am I making in order to pay the costs, right? How many units do I need to sell to pay the bills? All those are things that we'll talk about in depth in unit economics. Now, in the cash flow forecast, once you filled out your sales assumptions, you're actually able to give yourself a little bit of visibility to how your cash position as a business is going to be, right? This is focusing on cash. Now, I recognize that some people have more complicated circumstances as it relates to inventory, right? So if you're ordering inventory, maybe you have to put $5,000 out in 1 month and then get paid back in the other. That's obviously a very challenging kind of circumstance to be in. And you will need a little bit more sophisticated of a model than this one, right? Because practically speaking, you need tools in place to help you understand what your cash balance will be at the bank, right? That is very important, because then if you don't have that insight, you're in a circumstance where cash goes out of the business and you don't have enough money to pay for rent in month 3. That's terrifying, right? And that's happened to me before, right? That's terrifying. I don't want that to happen to you. So when you're thinking about cash inflows and cash outflows, this does not account for that fancy kind of situation where you have maybe complicated lead times or complicated payment terms, right? We need to be cognizant of that. That is one big risk. But unfortunately, because those things are so custom to your business, it's not possible for me to comment on that here and now. And that's why we have our one-on-one sessions, right? So if you have questions or concerns about how that works, we can be able to be here to support you through that journey. So talk to us specifically if you have like a cash model that you're working through and you're uncomfortable with, or maybe you don't have any cash management practice in place. Let's talk about that. Let's engage, because that's how we can best support you. And remember, all these things are paid for by the Hackney Council. The Hackney Council is the one who's putting on this business support. So if you have questions or comments or concerns, we're not going to charge you for this kind of knowledge, right? This is what we're here to do. And that's why we have the programs running. We find that often if you are an entrepreneur and you're working through some of these challenges, there are other entrepreneurs who are working through them as well. And it's really important to build an ecosystem or a network of other entrepreneurs who can help you navigate future crises, right? Because practically speaking, I can't be here all the time when you need help, right? I will do my best to be there to be a resource for you. But as you move forward, you're going to want to build your own resources, right? You're going to have your own network of people who know your needs a little bit more intimately than I ever will, right? Because you may have peers who work in the same industry, who are in the same local area, i.e. Hackney, working with you. And it may be more beneficial to actually have a friend and partner who can actually help you collaborate. So that's why we have our programs. We can obviously work with you throughout that journey. But yeah, back to this, the cash inflows and cash outflows. This gives you some insight to how much cash you will actually need and your cash closing position. So if you're a retail business and you're able to sell quite quickly and get cash into the business quite quickly, meaning pay for your inventory and your inventory comes in quickly, and you sell your inventory and cash comes back really quickly, this model probably works simply just as well for you. Or maybe you're an e-commerce business and you're seeing that kind of fast turnaround as well. This could also work for you as well. So this kind of forecast allows you to understand what happens then if you maybe add in a little bit of a loan, right? Maybe you get a bank loan, or maybe someone gives it to you for free for whatever reasons, right? So maybe you're very fortunate and someone's willing to lend you something at no interest. That's magnificent. I support that. Be conscious that you're not burning bridges, right? Be conscious that you're building a concrete end goal for that other stakeholder, right? We talked about this, that if you are engaging in any kind of financial ending kind of capacity, you want to provide that transparency to other people to let them know when you'll be able to pay them back and when you expect to be able to deliver your first payment, right? And so that's why this model is pretty useful, because you can actually model out a little bit of that, right? To give yourself an idea of how much money you need in the bank, right? And it also tells you when you'll go red, right? So that's quite good, because it lets you know how far that 5,000 pounds goes, which is quite significant. So this tool is free, right? It is there. I will send it out to you all after the end of the webinars today so that you can play and manipulate with this tool. There are lots of different resources out there. And in fact, I highly encourage you to explore what works best for you. But I'm going to go ahead and put up a couple other examples that if you wanted to kind of build a little bit more of a custom solution for yourself, there are tools that you can use that are free and not free as well. You don't need to have a complicated model. Remember, complications are not necessary. They can help, but they can also be very dangerous to the health of your business, because you spend so much time focusing on the model that you forget to deliver on the product or service, right? So do everything in moderation. Try not to over-index. Let's talk briefly here about what other resources are available for you to be able to capitalize on. So Causal, for instance, has some free templates that you could check out. Causal is a business planning platform. It allows you to kind of put in some assumptions and figure out how long things will go. There's some cash flow modeling tools in there. Maybe there's something that's useful for you. If not, you can also go ahead and start trying to build your own. Now, remember, don't invest too much time. We've just gone through that Excel model where we talked about the cash flow forecast. And then we have to ask the question about, like, okay, is it the best use of your time, right? So if you're a solo entrepreneur and you're thinking about an accountant, that is a tricky one, right? Because it kind of depends on how much money you're generating and whether or not you need to bring in outside expertise. Now, if you're an entrepreneur that has a team, right, and one person who's already dedicated to finances, make sure that that person's focus is really directed on helping you manage cash, right? It's quite key that in a tough economic circumstance, we have visibility to that. If you're at that middle ground where you're between an entrepreneur and maybe having a team and things are going okay enough, and you're starting to ask the question of, do I need a financial advisor? It's best to start working with people who can give you meaningful commercial insight to your business, right? So if you are feeling that, my best use of my personal time is to go out and generate sales, find a accountant or financial advisor that you personally trust through discussion, right? Learn about them, get some referrals, get some testimonials to understand kind of what is it about their practice that allows you to know more about the business, right? If you're just looking for someone to do filings, they're everywhere, right? That's fine. You can find anybody to do filings, right? They may do it, there are people who do it less well than others, of course. But ultimately, our focus is saying, what kind of insights can we take from a financial advisor? Now, if you're at that point where you feel like, I really could benefit from some insights, try to figure out, like, what is the baseline kind of knowledge that you need in order to really thrive. Because if you don't know what you need, there's no way that an advisor could tell you that information or even price that information. Now, if we're at the question of what do I need, that's a good point to be at. And that's actually where we can go and benefit from the unit economics session, because we're going to dig into how do we identify the break-even point in a business so that you can say, okay, well, what aspects of my business do I need advice on, right? And you might find that there are some industry professionals who are really knowledgeable about retail, right? So maybe you have an accountant who just knows retail businesses so well because they have so many clients in that space. That could be somebody that you draw upon, because you may be new to the industry and you may not have that knowledge. It's okay to lean on other people, but make sure that you set expectations so that you can say, okay, what is it that I'm getting from this person and what is it that they're giving to me, right? Because too often there's a breakdown between getting an accountant and expecting certain levels of knowledge from them, right? Too often I've heard people say, I'm paying them this amount of money and they're supposed to be my financial advisor. And I was like, okay, so how do they contribute to you? Right? If you can't tell me how they contribute to you, then we probably need to be asking, why are we investing in this person, right? Because every person that is being paid should be contributing something back to you more than just, transactional kind of things. And so if you're not sure about your financial advisor, start asking your peers, start asking your mentors, start asking other people in the community, hey, who do you use as a financial advisor, right? And when did you start using them, right? Because your peers will be best placed to tell you at what point did they pick that up, right? I could tell you, oh, you should get it, but do I know your industry as well as you? Probably not, right? I trust that you have that capability to build relationships within the community in order to be able to say, I'm leveraging best practice, right? We're not going to pretend that we know everything, right? That's not a fair representation. It's really important that you also are enabled to be able to build on local resources. So what is the checklist? What is the things that you should be doing, right? You should have weekly clarity to cash. You should know what the cash position is, what the ins and outs are, right? Your monthly budgeting obviously stems from that weekly cash clarity, because that's how you're able to determine where are things moving, what are the strengths and risks of my business. And then you should be working on a daily target, right? Which means, how do we actually deliver to our monthly budget, right? How do we actually deliver to getting to that happy, successful point? So We're going to talk a lot more about that in the unit economics session, where we can talk specifically about how each thing is broken down. We're actually just going to work through a bunch of different examples of how we could possibly model out a break-even point, or how we can think about pricing, because it tends to be that, there is not really a right answer for what your price is, but only rather what is the price that works best for you and your business, right? And you may actually discover that the price that works well or delivers profit is not actually consumer or business customer ready, right? Maybe people are like, just can't handle that price, and that's the reality of the circumstance. That insight is obviously important, because if we try to sell a product that is priced wrong, quote unquote, then obviously we're going to do poorly as a business, right? So thinking about these three things, right? Making sure that we have this checklist in place in order to deliver on, actually, I really want to highlight these 3 points again. So I'm going to go back. Here we are. These three things, right? Knowing the risks and strengths of your business, building in buffer for the risky moment, and then focusing on things that create margin positive moments, right? Margin positive moments is the big focus of our unit economics session this afternoon. So don't stress if you don't exactly know what that means. We can get there. Okay. So hopping back to the end here, we've talked about a little about some of these common questions, right? When should I increase my prices? When do I need an accountant or a financial advisor? As it relates to the prices, honestly, the correct answer is when it benefits you and the customer in a reasonably commensurate way, right? So you can't just increase prices and expect customers to pay for it, right? Customers are willing to pay more prices or higher prices if there is a commensurate level of value being created for them, right? And I'm not saying that the price increase has to justify a creation of more value, but rather sometimes, for instance, in the restaurant industry, when I was working there, was about saying, okay, hey, we haven't raised prices in the past 3 years and inflation has been blah. We need to be able to adjust in order to stay afloat, or else we won't be able to deliver this value for you on a long-term basis, right? We simply will go under, right? And that often, people are understanding, right? They're not thrilled, right? No one's going to lie to you and say, I love the increase in prices, but it does allow you to have that kind of transparent, authentic conversation with the customers, so that they know that you're not just there increasing prices for the sake of increasing prices, right? And I appreciate that people should know that, but they often don't, right? You have to communicate that with people, because people tend to be a little bit more kind of like in their own head and focusing on their own issues. And they're not really thinking about you, right? No offense. Can you get financial assistance from the government? There are various things that are occurring, but there is no direct kind of COVID payment set up at the moment, right? Where they did that big push of cash to various businesses. We should have a little bit of insight if you're able to sit down and have a conversation with us as to say what could or couldn't work. So if there are concerns and you have some kind of questions about financial assistance as it relates to your business, and you want to engage on that on a one-on-one basis, we're here for you, right? We have a virtual option. You can meet with us in person, whatever's most flexible for you. And we can talk about what options exist. And we'll also be real with you, right? We're not going to lie and say that, that yes, you'll be able to grab that, right? We'll be transparent and try to let you know, hey, sometimes these things don't exist for these audiences, right? And that's an unfortunate kind of circumstance as it relates to kind of the way things being structured. But we'll be honest with you, and we'll be transparent about what we can do to support and what resources might lie out there. As a reminder, right, we have a platform called Join Secret, which is a discounts platform that allows you to get discounts on various software that may be helpful for your business, right? So if right now, for instance, maybe you're operating on an old school cash register and you're looking to kind of really get better payment processing, or maybe like a POS system. There are various payment processing gateways. There are various email lists, marketing tools, MailChimp. There's lots of software that people have not heard of, right? There's also accountancy software if you want to consider changing your accountancy software. Lots of different things are available on that platform, and that will be shared as well in our big wrap up. So as a reminder, we have a platform called Join Secret that will be listed in the same place that we have all the recordings for today's sessions, should you have any questions from today. Okay. And then the question about how much should I pay myself in this environment, right? The big thing that we really should be preparing ourselves for is creating a very clear picture as to what would happen if you paid yourself X amount of money, right? How long would the business survive? How long would you be able to handle that, right? And this is why it's really important to have like a clear understanding of the strengths and risks of your business model, because then this allows us to be able to say, oh, hey, you should pay yourself this much money, right? And often I've seen business leaders in cost crisis situations take pay cuts in order to keep their employees paid at a rate that allows them to kind of survive. And I recognize that's not an option for everybody, but there are considerations that can be made. And if you have a very specific circumstance, you should speak to us so that we can actually be able to help give you more practical advice as it relates to your circumstance, right? It's hard for a PowerPoint presentation or a webinar to be perfectly ideal for your needs. So if there's something that you're concerned about or you feel unclear, remember that we are here for you, okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to general Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing really quick. You're more than welcome to put your questions in the chat, or if you'd like to come up, I'm very happy to answer any questions as it relates to anything. Let me see. I just saw a hand go up. Give me one second.
Thank you, Andrew. We do have one raised hand in the audience here so far.
Wait 1 second. Samang, thank you for your question. I can invite you up to the front, or if you'd like, I can let you put it in chat. What would you prefer? We have given you the option if you'd like to be able to ask a question verbally, or if you'd like to put it in chat. Up to you. In the meantime, while Samang is working on their question, if anyone else has any questions or comments or concerns, very happy to either address them in the webinar chat, or if you'd like to come up, we're very happy to speak to you virtually as well. We'll give it just one moment. Okay, Samang, so I'm going to go ahead and put you off to the side so that you can stew on your chat just a little bit longer. Seems like there might have been a technical glitch there, if that was possibly the case. But if there are any other questions, we're very happy to answer them. Feel free to put them in chat. Oh, no worries, no worries. Perfect.
Yeah, raised by accident.
All good, thank you. Okay. Great. So right now, the current agenda for the rest of the day is that we have a break. So please feel free to continue doing what is best for you in this day. We've created this as a hop in, a hop out moment, so that if you wanted to be able to join us at a later session, I highly encourage you come to our 1 o'clock. That's a talk by Hazel Lim, who is sharing her thoughts as a growth hacker on how she has approached creating innovative approaches to growth. She has worked with a lot of our companies before, and I highly recommend that you capitalize on this free session to kind of see what tips and tricks might work best for you. If there are any questions in the interim, feel free to reach out to us on social media or on email. We're very happy to help answer any questions as it relates to this day. So we'll see you at 1 o'clock or the later sessions this afternoon, and we'll catch you soon.
And just so you know, one last thing, Andrew, since you were talking, I was just monitoring some of the activity. We will be sending out the links by email. So in case there's any trouble joining the sessions, we'll be sending out an email reminder 15 minutes before so that you have time to log in properly. Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.